I went to a pretty normal college in the Midwest. Nothing special about it. Just a quiet campus with a few old brick buildings, a big library, and dorms scattered around the area. During the day, it was full of people walking to class, laughing, blasting music, the usual college vibe. But at night, the place felt completely different. My name's Ryan, and during my sophomore year, I worked a part-time job on campus. I was one of the student assistants for the media lab inside the communications building. Basically, my job was simple. Stay there during the late hours, make sure nobody messed with the equipment, and lock up the rooms before leaving. Most nights were boring as hell. Students would come in to edit videos, record podcasts, or work on projects. By around 10:30 p.m., everyone would usually leave, and I'd just sit there scrolling through my phone waiting for midnight so I could lock everything up. The communications building itself was pretty old, though. It had these long, narrow hallways, flickering fluorescent lights, and those old classroom doors with small glass windows in them. At night, when it got quiet, every little sound echoed through the hallways. Still, nothing ever really happened, until one night in October. That night, I remember the weather being awful. It had been raining all evening, and the wind was blowing hard enough that you could hear it whistling through the windows. By around 10:45 p.m., the last student packed up his laptop and left. "See you tomorrow, man," he said as he walked out. "Later," I replied. After he left, the building got dead quiet. I did my usual routine, checked the editing rooms, turned off a few lights, and sat back down at the front desk near the entrance. Outside the glass doors, I could see the empty campus walkway. The rain was hitting the pavement under the street lights, and the whole place just had this eerie vibe. Around 11:15 p.m., I heard something. Footsteps. At first, I thought maybe another student came back inside the building, but the footsteps didn't sound like they were near the entrance. They were coming from deeper in the hallway, which was weird because I had just checked every room and nobody was there. I looked down the hallway. The lights were still on, but the corridor looked darker than usual. The wind outside made the windows rattle slightly, and for a moment I just sat there listening. The footsteps stopped. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I waited a few seconds. Nothing. I figured maybe I imagined it. When buildings get quiet like that, your brain can start playing tricks on you. So I went back to scrolling on my phone. About 5 minutes later, though, I heard it again. This time it was louder. Clear footsteps walking across the hallway floor. Slow, deliberate. I looked up again, feeling that weird tension in my chest. "Yo, is someone still here?" I said a little louder. Still no answer. Now I was starting to get annoyed. If someone was still in the building, they were supposed to check in with the front desk. So I stood up and started walking down the hallway. The lights buzzed quietly overhead as I moved past the classrooms. The whole place felt strangely empty. I checked the first editing room. Empty. Second room. Empty. The podcast studio. Also empty. At that point, I was convinced someone had to be messing with me. Maybe some students sneaking around trying to scare people or something. As I walked back toward the front desk, suddenly I heard a door close behind me. I spun around immediately. One of the classroom doors at the end of the hallway was now shut. The thing is, when I walked past it earlier, I specifically remembered it being open. I just stood there staring at it. My heart started beating faster. "All right, real funny," I said out loud. No response. I slowly walked toward the door. The hallway felt colder for some reason. As I got closer, I noticed the small glass window on the door, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move inside the room. I froze. Maybe it was just a shadow from outside, or maybe someone really was in there. Trying not to look like a complete idiot, I reached for the door handle and pushed it open. The classroom was empty, completely empty. Rows of desks, a whiteboard, and a projector hanging from the ceiling. No person, no sound, nothing.
I stepped inside just to double-check behind the podium and desks. Still nothing. At that point, I was starting to feel genuinely uncomfortable because there was no logical explanation for the door closing, unless someone had run out of the room before I got there. But the only exit was the hallway I had just walked through, meaning I would have seen them. Trying to shake it off, I walked back toward the front desk. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The front entrance doors were slightly open, just a few inches, which was impossible. They were heavy automatic lock doors. Once they closed, they stayed shut, but now they were slowly moving back and forth with the wind, like someone had just walked out, or walked in. I stepped closer and looked outside. The campus was completely empty. Rain still pouring down, streetlights glowing on the wet pavement. No one there. I stood there for a few seconds thinking maybe security came by, but then I noticed muddy footprints on the floor. They started right at the entrance, and they were leading deeper into the building, right down the hallway I had just walked through. And that's when I realized something that made the hair on my arms stand up. Those footprints weren't there earlier.
I stared down at the muddy footprints for a good few seconds. They were fresh. You could see the water still glistening under the fluorescent lights, and they definitely hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier when I walked that same hallway. For a second, I honestly considered just locking the building and getting the hell out of there. But technically, that was part of my job. If someone was still inside the building after hours, I had to check. So I grabbed the small flashlight we kept under the desk and started following the footprints. They led straight down the hallway. Each step was slow and uneven, like whoever walked in was dragging their feet slightly. The sound of the rain outside echoed faintly through the building as I moved forward. My heart was beating harder than it should have been. I kept telling myself it was probably just some student who forgot something and came back to grab it. Still, something about it didn't feel right. The footprints passed the editing rooms, then the podcast studio. Then they turned the corner toward the older part of the building. That area was barely used anymore. Most of the classrooms there were storage rooms filled with old equipment. The lights over there were dimmer, too, and a few of them flickered constantly. As I turned the corner, I pointed the flashlight down the hallway. The footprints continued along the floor. But now I noticed something else. They stopped, right in front of one of the storage rooms. I slowly approached the door. It was labeled Storage B12 in faded letters. And just like earlier, the door was slightly open. I felt a chill run down my back because I was almost positive that door had been closed when I checked the building earlier. I pushed the door open a little more. "Hello?" I called out. The beam from my flashlight cut through the darkness. Inside the room were stacks of old chairs, broken monitors, dusty boxes, and shelves full of outdated equipment. At first glance, it looked empty, but something smelled off. Not like trash or mold, more like wet clothes, like someone had just come in from the rain. I stepped a little further into the room. The floor creaked under my shoes. My flashlight game moved across the shelves, the boxes, the old equipment. Then it stopped. There was a chair sitting in the middle of the room, facing the door. That definitely wasn't normal. Storage rooms at the school were always messy, but nothing was ever arranged like that. Just one chair, placed right in the center, and for some reason that freaked me out way more than it should have. I slowly backed up toward the doorway. "All right, whoever's in here, this isn't funny," I said. Still no response. The room was dead silent, just the faint buzzing of the lights in the hallway behind me. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard something behind me. A breath, right next to my ear. Not loud, just a quiet inhale.
I jumped forward instantly and spun around, shining the flashlight behind me. Nothing. The chair was still there, the shelves, the boxes. No person, no movement. But I swear on everything I heard someone breathing. At that point, my chest felt tight, like my body was telling me to get out. So I walked quickly back into the hallway and started heading toward the front desk. But halfway down the hallway, the lights went out. All of them. The entire corridor dropped into darkness. For a split second, I just froze. Then the emergency lights kicked on, those dim red lights that barely illuminate anything. The hallway looked completely different now. Dark, distorted. Every shadow looked twice as long. My flashlight felt way less comforting. I picked up my pace, trying not to panic. Just get back to the front desk, call campus security, let them deal with it. That's all I had to do. But then I heard footsteps again, behind me, slow, heavy, exactly like earlier, except now they were much closer. I turned around and pointed the flashlight down the hallway. Nothing there, just the empty corridor glowing faint red from the emergency lights. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything was silent again. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out quickly. It was a campus safety alert notification. Those sometimes pop up if there's bad weather or something going on nearby. But the message on the screen made my stomach twist. It read, "Security alert. Communications building closed early due to incident. All staff evacuated at 9:45 p.m. I stared at the screen, confused. Evacuated? That didn't make any sense. I had been sitting at the front desk the entire night. Nobody evacuated anything. And then a second message popped up. This one wasn't from the campus alert system. It was from an unknown number. Just 3 words. "You're still inside." My hands started shaking. And that's when the footsteps started again. Only this time, they were